Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, welcome to today's webinar, which is organized by the Center for International Strategic Analysis, ΚΕΔΙΣΑ, and the Embassy of the Republic of Lithuania in Greece. This is the third time we co-organize a webinar with the Embassy of the Republic of Lithuania, and we are confident that it will be as successful as the previous ones. Having said that, I would like to cordially thank Her Excellency, the Ambassador of the Republic of Lithuania, Ms. Lina Skerstonaitė, and the Deputy Head of Mission, Mr. Mindaugas Vyskupaitis, for their kind cooperation. Before giving the floor to Her Excellency, Mrs. Lina Skerstonaitė, I would like to underline the importance of the topic of today's webinar. Amid the current turbulent geopolitical environment, with the ongoing war in Ukraine and the political instability in Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, the EU enlargement in the regions of Eastern Europe and the Western Balkans is facing serious challenges that we hope they can be overcome. Our distinguished speakers, Mrs. Aiste Bertulite Sikevichene and Professor Nikolaos Gefakis, I'm confident that they will shed light on how the enlargement can be successful for the benefit of the people of the candidate countries and the EU citizens as well. Thank you once again, everyone, and especially the distinguished speakers for joining us and the Embassy of Lithuania, and of course the attendants. And now I will pass the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Lina Skerstonaitė, for her introductory speech. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here with us today.
Good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this seminar on the enlargement of the European Union. Today, we gather to discuss a topic that is not only shaping, the future of EU, but also it influences the global politics and economic dynamics. The European Union has always been a project of unity, cooperation, and shared progress. Enlargement has played a crucial role in strengthening these values, bringing together nations under common vision of peace, stability, and prosperity. And however, with each expansion, new challenges and opportunities arises, economic, political, social, whatever kind you wish. But in today's ever-changing world, the word unity stands out. And for me, the EU is an example of what unity should be. We all might be different in shape and sizes, but we must agree on fundamental values on which EU was built: human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law, and human rights. And let us use this opportunity to foster dialogue, exchange ideas, and contribute to a deeper understanding of what lies ahead for the European Union. Thank you so much, and thank you very much, Andrέas, for organizing this event with us. I'm indeed looking forward to organizing another one, to have the fourth and fifth on the roll, but that's for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. The pleasure is ours. We are able to co-organize events with the Embassy of Lithuania in Greece, and I'm confident that we're going to organize more events in the near future. Now I would like to welcome officially Mrs. Aiste Bertulite Sikevichene, if I'm spelling her second surname correctly, I hope. Thank you. Before giving her the floor, I would like to say a couple of words about her. Mrs. Aiste Bertulite Sikevichene is a senior diplomat with 20 years of experience in the Lithuanian diplomatic service. As a Lithuanian delegate at the COEAST, Eastern Europe and Central Asia Working Party in Brussels from 2021 to 2024, Aiste was participating at all the stages of the decision-making on opening the enlargement negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova, including in the first intergovernmental conferences that took place in June 2024. Aiste has previously served as Lithuanian diplomat in Madrid, Spain, as well as the chair of the Development Cooperation Working Party during Lithuanian presidency of the EU Council in Brussels. these are a few words about Mrs. Bertolite bio. So I'm welcoming her. We thank her once more for her kind participation, and we are looking forward for her speech.
Thank you, Andreas. Thank you. Indeed, nice to be here. Thank you for this invitation. Hello to everyone participating here. It's a great pleasure for me. I'm a counselor of the EU department at the Lithuanian MFA. And as Andreas has already explained, my last posting was in Brussels. I served as the COAS delegate, the working party that works directly with the Eastern Partnership countries, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and South Caucasus. And I actually had this chance this opportunity to participate in most of the decisions that were taken before the start of the war of Russia's war in Ukraine and after it started, and indeed a lot of decisions that were taken in terms on enlargement. So I hope what I will be able to share would be interesting for you, and I hope to shed a bit of light on the Eastern, on enlargement to the East, on Ukraine and Moldova. So now I would like to start sharing my presentation. I hope you can see it already.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. So before I go on talking about the Eastern countries, Eastern aspirants, Ukraine and Moldova, I would like to say a few words in general on this momentum in Europe now. As all of us know that Europe, since its creation, was a place of attraction for most of the countries neighboring EU, which were seeking to also to be the part of this world of freedom, prosperity, and the world which is governed by the rule of law and by the democratic principles. And we as Lithuanians, we are very proud already being 20 years in this world, in this project. Last year we celebrated the 20th anniversary of Big Bang enlargement, which included basically 10 more countries to EU. And actually, this process of enlargement was demonstrated a big power of EU, that EU has, the big transformative power that EU has on its neighborhood with this tool, the enlargement as a tool and a method to make changes in other countries. And we are really proud in Lithuania that we undergone such a tectonic changes actually from where we were before EU integration and where we are now. And I think the same could be said about our fellow partners in the Baltics and Central Europe. But of course, enlargement is not an easy thing for EU as well. And with the following enlargements with Romania and Bulgaria in 2007, and the last enlargement that happened in 2013 with Croatia. After that, you could say that there was some such kind of a fatigue felt in EU as concerns the enlargement policy. And with the start of the war by Russia in Ukraine, all of it has suddenly was shaken. I think what we need to stress that the motivation that was shown from the country that was invaded by Ukraine, and the aspiration and the motivation that was shown, that was the first thing that shook the whole idea of enlargement, because just after 4 days of the start of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine's president presented the application for EU membership. That was, I think, the shock. And the second thing is that EU itself changed its opinion, basically changed its perspective to enlargement, and understanding that that is strategic necessity for EU itself. It came quite quickly, and I think after the war started, a lot of decisions, a lot of changes that were made. It looked that it happened overnight, that we turned our heads overnight about how we are thinking about things in Europe. Now I would like to go and say a few words in general on where we are with the enlargement process. I won't go into much detail on the Western Balkan countries, but I would like to say maybe a few words on Georgia. As you know, Georgia, as well as Ukraine and Moldova, applied for EU membership very fast after the war started in Ukraine. However, and unfortunately, we have now the situation that Georgia itself decided to turn back to Europe by itself, and halted the whole process. Actually, before Georgia took this decision in European Council, there were already discussions in European Council in its conclusions in 2024, in summer 2024, already talked about the risk that Georgia might go into the standstill in this process. As you know, they were given a candidate status, but they did not start the negotiation process yet, because they had to implement certain reforms and steps required by the European Commission. However, instead of implementing those steps, they took the steps that turned the direction to the opposite from the EU. And I think to this slide, I haven't added yet Iceland, which is an interesting point to add to all this picture, is that Iceland, which has halted its integration process at some moment, now is again politically talking about the possibility of again organizing a referendum on enlargement. And this is one of those examples that actually the change that were brought with this tremendous war on the soil of Europe had made. It's something comparable with Sweden and Finland joining NATO. So now we have other countries, Iceland, and if Iceland goes on this road, we might see even more interesting things, like Norway also maybe will start thinking about this process. So now I will go ahead on talking about the topic that I was asked to share about Ukraine and Moldova. And indeed, as I was in Brussels, and then most of those decisions were taken, so I'm very, very glad to share a little bit of my impressions on those decisions. Of course, this first application, it was a surprise, but again, not such a surprise for us, for Lithuanians, because in our part of the world, we supported those aspirations from Ukraine, from Moldova, from Georgia. We always supported their aspirations for European Union. But as you know, the path of those countries developed a bit differently. And it was before the start of the war, I can say it was even sometimes difficult to mention word aspirations in our conclusions or in our EU statements. We didn't even want to admit that those countries might be aspiring for EU. Not us, not Lithuanians, of course, not the Baltics, that we were always supportive, but there were countries like Netherlands, which had a referendum on the association agreement, and it was signed with Ukraine, and they had their own thinking that this should never lead towards the enlargement of Europe. But as I mentioned before, actually the geopolitical situation changed a lot of this mindset. And of course, very fastly after Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia applied for EU membership, European Council invited Commission to prepare the opinion on the application. What was interesting is that then this Commission's opinion on the application is prepared. It usually takes a lot of time. Sometimes it might take 1 year and more than 1 year. But then the questionnaire from the Commission was presented to Ukraine. It was, I think, on the 8th of April in 2022. And Ukraine responded with all the answers to that huge questionnaire just in a month. That already demonstrated to everyone how motivated this country is to go ahead. The same motivation could be seen, of course, in Moldova. And at that time, we saw motivated Georgia as well. Then the decision to grant the candidate status for those for three or for partnership countries, Eastern Partnership countries, was taken in June 2022. The decision to grant them candidate status was taken on the understanding that those countries will implement certain reforms and certain steps. So there were 12 steps set for Georgia, 9 steps for Moldova, and 7 steps for Ukraine. And, you know, we hear a lot of talks like, you know, this is geopolitical. The process with Eastern Partnership is geopolitical. It's not only geopolitical, it's really a merits-based process, because those reforms and those steps that they had to do, they were huge, they were draconic. I mean, the Ukraine needed to change its judiciary system, to change how the Constitutional Court judges are selected, to adopt many laws in order to fight the corruption. And those requirements were very detailed and very huge. And actually they demonstrated, those countries demonstrated results. Ukraine especially and Moldova, they demonstrated a lot of results that paved the way to the positive Commission's evaluation in 2023. That was made together with the enlargement package, with the Commission's communication on the enlargement package, and that paved the way to the European Council's decision to actually open the negotiation that was taken in December in 2023. What happened next? In the next half of the year, the Council prepared the negotiating framework for Ukraine and Moldova. And then the negotiating frameworks were prepared. The first intergovernmental conferences were organized in June in 2024. And this is how the negotiations started. So where we are now? Now we are in the screening process. Screening is the exercise that Commission is going through with the candidate countries. In the first stages of negotiations, they are screening the whole legal framework in the country and looking how it is comparable to the acquis communautaire and what needs to be done in each of the negotiating chapters. So I go to a next slide. That is the basic overview of all the clusters of negotiating chapters. Now we have 35 negotiating chapters, and they are divided into 6 clusters. So Commission now has prepared the screening report on the first cluster, which is fundamentals. So fundamentals, you can see it here in the dark blue color. And now the green light to issue this report to Ukraine is stuck in the Council due to Hungary's opposition. This is one of the difficulties in the enlargement process, that every step in it has to be taken unanimously. So basically, to open one of the clusters, you need 2 or 3 unanimous votes from the member states. And if countries like Hungary, which they have their bilateral issues, they are raising their bilateral issues, if they decide to block the negotiations, then the negotiations are stuck. Technically, we believe, and we know it actually from the Commission, that they are prepared to finalize the screening of all the 6 negotiating clusters of negotiating chapters for Ukraine and Moldova. In this year, they would be able to finalize 3 of them during Polish presidency and the next 3 of them during Danish presidency. And our position, Lithuanian position, and I think many other member states agree to this, is that we could actually open all of those clusters of negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova already this year. This is technically possible. Of course, politically, it's complicated because of the current Hungary's veto. So how do we see the way forward, and what are the main challenges in this process? We really, from Lithuanian perspective, we really believe in this merits-based principle as the basis of the entire process. For us, we think that it needs to remain a fundamental principle in the process. And we benefited, as the country that undergone all of this integration process, we benefited from it a lot. In Lithuania, we sometimes even say that from the integration process, from the enlargement, we sometimes say that we benefited more because it changed our country incredibly. We benefited even more than actually being the members. Next aspect that we need to think about is the Russia's war and the need of supporting Ukraine and containing Russia. This aspect has two things to have in mind. We believe that the Ukraine's anchoring into EU is now a necessity, and especially in current geopolitical situation. It's a necessity for the security of Europe. A lot will depend on what will happen with this now currently ongoing talks, peace talks. If Russia refuses to uphold ceasefire, or refuses to actually participate in this peace, what we see that it's not ready, that Putin is not ready to actually do that. So we will face the same difficulty because the enlargement process will be a lot influenced by the war. And it's quite complicated to implement the reforms. Although we see this motivation from Ukraine, a lot of motivation to do that, but every time with the years going on, it becomes even more difficult. Therefore, we will need to continue support, financial, military support to Ukraine, all we can do. But another aspect is this security aspect for Europe itself. We see a big danger if Ukraine is not anchored in Europe. We see a big danger in the future developments and what might happen. We don't want to think about that situation, but just imagine that Russia keeps control of the regions in Ukraine and keeps its influence in meddling in the internal policies of Ukraine, the same as it is doing in Georgia, the same as it is doing now in Moldova. And Moldova is also facing this difficult situation with the Transnistrian region, with the Gagauzia, which is very influenced by Russians and Russian disinformation. So now Ukraine is the most pro-European country, and this is part of the biggest security guarantee for us. If, God forbid, Ukraine becomes more pro-Russian, it will be a really, really big threat to us, and we don't want to think about this situation. Of course, to go ahead with the enlargement to Ukraine, it's important to overcome this bilateralism. We face big challenges with Hungarian vote. We always, at every step in the enlargement, we have to think what else they will put on the table. Now they are asking for the action plan on minorities. This action plan is foreseen in the negotiating framework, and Ukraine has developed this action plan and is ready to put it forward. However, we see that a big risk that Hungary will again block the opening of the first cluster just because they will invent a new requirement. Something will not go as they want from their side on this action plan, and every time they will invent something that really has nothing to do with the acquis communautaire and nothing to do with Copenhagen criteria. So bilateralism in the enlargement process is something that we did not have in 2004, and what now becomes a stumble block for the many of the countries negotiating. EU needs to prepare. That is quite clear. Many said before the enlargement in 2004, many said that this will be too difficult, that you cannot absorb so many countries, but still it absorbed 10 countries with 100 million, and the economy, European economy and socioeconomic development only grew from this. So I will talk a little bit about this preparation later in my next slides. And we from Lithuania also promote now the importance to set the target date, 2030, for Ukraine's integration. So a little bit also about this merits-based approach and why we think that actually Ukraine and Moldova are quite fit for this exercise, and they are actually doing quite well in this term. So these tables are prepared basing on the enlargement package and the evaluation of all of the state of play in every of the negotiating chapters and the progress made. So in the first table, you can see the state of play, how much the candidate countries are advanced in the negotiations. Of course, most of the Balkan countries are much more advanced than Ukraine and Moldova because they started this exercise much earlier. But if you look at the second table, you see the progress made in 2024 and 2023. And you see that the biggest progress was made in Montenegro, Moldova, and Ukraine. And last year, Moldova and Ukraine were the first in this row, which were making the biggest progress among the candidate countries. So this is really surprising, knowing that the countries like Ukraine is actually undergoing a full-scale invasion and war, and Moldova, which is also suffering the consequences from that war and a lot of influence and difficulties with the Russian pressure. Now, a little bit about the preparations. You all most probably know that we are looking forward for the Commission's communication on the preparations for enlargement. The communication might come out already in April, and European Council will refer to all of this in June, and it should overview the necessary policy reviews and reforms, how EU will be preparing itself for the enlargement. From the Lithuanian perspective, we think that the most important is to look at the EU policies, that of course the policies like common agricultural policy, cohesion policy, they will certainly need to be adapted a little bit, but there is not so much to be afraid of, and I will go to this a little bit later. But not to the institutional reforms that should, from our perspective, should go in a due time, but not now, because if we start discussing institutional reforms or some treaty changes, we know that we might be stuck with the whole process. And I wanted to share with you a little bit about the findings of a couple of studies conducted in Lithuania. Those studies were commissioned by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well as by Lithuanian Research Council. First they made an overview of the impact of the previous enlargements on the socioeconomic development of the EU 15, the older member states, as well as they looked at various policies and what influence the next enlargement might have on the various policies. And actually, the finding was that it will not be such a big issue on the policies, because first of all, probably most of the new countries will have to have the transitional periods, arrangements that we also had. For example, on the common agricultural policy, as you know, then we started as a member of EU, our direct payments for our farmers reached only the 20% of the average of the direct payments in EU. After 20 years of being the members, we still do not get the same amount as the former older member states as the direct payments. And after 20 years, the direct payments are only at the 70% of the average in Lithuania. So this, we are not already not in the transitional period, but again, all this convergence, and especially as concerns payments, it does not go so quickly. Again, the cohesion policy, the studies analyzed more the impact on Lithuania, what might the enlargement might have on the cohesion policy. The thing is that Lithuania, with its economic development, now is going out of this basket of who might get the funds from the cohesion policy. So that is a bit of a different thing, and that enlargement will not actually be the most important impact to this. And again, a lot will depend on how these policies will be reformed and reviewed in the next years. What we have to think about, it's really the future MFF, the future multi-annual financial framework, that it really needs to be prepared for the enlargement. And in this slide, you can see the graph made by one of the studies of the social economic development of the 15 older EU member states. It takes into account various indexes, PPP per person, unemployment rate, crime rate, the average job payments, and they made those graphs that show quite clearly that from 2004, all of the EU 15 countries were growing until basically until 2007, and then of course the impact from crisis is quite well seen. But at least three or four first years was a huge positive impact on the growth of the social economic development of the EU 15. In preparing for enlargement, what we need to think a lot about is about the communication. And in the communication, it's important to think what those new countries that are coming and will be coming to Europe, what they will bring on the table. And of course, the stabilization of EU neighborhood and the security that I already talked about, the expansion of internal market and the rules-based area, what is important, strengthening EU's geostrategic role, and apparently it will be more and more important as we see with the current developments today. Defense capabilities, certainly, and security of Europe, and of course many other things that those countries have, IT strength, green energy, cybersecurity, critical raw materials, skilled labor, positive impact on economic growth. This is my final slide, is about why we have this view to have a target date for Ukraine's integration. So I already talked about that. This perspective, from our perspective, is based basically on the understanding that this is a security necessity for us. It's not only for Ukraine, but it's for us, for Europe. Because if Ukraine is not anchored in EU, it might turn. And the influence of Russia, of war, might be quite huge on the society. again, having a target date is a big motivation for Ukraine. We saw that all this enlargement process, integration process, during the last 3 years in Ukraine, which was fighting the war, was a really, really big motivation. We know that Ukraine will need a lot of support for this. We are prepared to give this support. Lithuania, Denmark, together with European Commission, in January this year, we started the EU integration facility in Ukraine to help them to strengthen their administrative capacities and to prepare better for the negotiations and integration. But they will certainly need a lot of support in different areas, especially those areas that need to attract more private investments, because we know that the state budget, we are supporting it, but the aid that is coming from the international partners, and now especially the USAID, is basically going out in most of the areas. It's quite complicated. It's becoming even more complicated. So the need for support and reforming the areas that might attract more private investments will be very and especially important. Political support, and here Greece comes into picture, because Greece, together with Lithuania and Ireland, will be chairing EU presidency from 2026 to 2027, and those years will be crucial in the process. So we hope that we will work together very closely to push this Ukraine's integration forward. So just a few final words. I think Ukraine is prepared for that, for 2030. Moldova is prepared for that, maybe even earlier. And Europe, we must also be prepared for that, to integrate those countries by 2030. So thank you for now, and we'll be glad to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Aiste, Ms. Bertolite. Thank you very much for your insightful, comprehensive, and very detailed presentation. Now I'm going to give the floor to Professor Nikolaos Gifakis. Before doing that, I would like also to say a few words about him. So Professor Nikolaos Gifakis holds a Jean Monnet Chair in EU Foreign Policy in the Western Balkans, and is Professor of International Relations at the Department of Political Science and International Relations of the University of the Peloponnese. His research interests include contemporary Western Balkan politics, EU external relations, and international relations theory. His recent publications include articles in peer-reviewed journals such as Cambridge Review of International Affairs, Conflict, Security and Development, Ethnopolitics, European Foreign Affairs Review, Global Society, International Journal, Journal of International Development, Journal of Southern Europe and the Balkans, Perspectives on European Politics and Society, Problems of Post-Communism, Southeastern Europe, Southeast European and Black Sea Studies, and Voluntas. In 2008, he was awarded the Marseille Cadet Distinguished Writing Award for his co-authored article with Professor Asteris Chouliaras in the International Journal. So this is a few words about Professor's bio. Thank you very much, Professor, for being here with us today, for accepting our invitation, and we are looking forward for your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity to talk about the Balkans. That's a topic that it is not much discussed in Greece, and also especially I enjoyed a lot Mrs. Gikevicien's intervention. Ukraine and Moldova's EU accession is less known in Greece, given the geographical distance. I'll try to, within the next quarter, to sketch out some things that concern the Balkans, but not only in terms of EU enlargement. Now, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 brought about what Joseph Borrell termed at that time the EU's geopolitical awakening. The EU made a series of decisions, including the activation of its enlargement policy, to enhance its geopolitical influence in the Western Balkans and Eastern Europe. In this way, the European Union signaled that it was not eager to leave a grey zone on a no man's land in Europe. However, there are three main challenges to the EU integration of the Western Balkans. The first challenge concerns the EU itself, and it is, to use the jargon, to render the EU enlargement ready, which means to increase the efficiency of EU governance. Arguably, the size of EU institutions cannot be increased indefinitely. Also, the range of issue areas where decisions are still taken with unanimity should be shrunk to avoid decision-making paralysis. And lastly, the EU budget should substantially increase to address the multiple challenges facing an enlarged union at this time. Fortunately, a treaty modification is not necessary to undertake all these reforms. According to the Treaty of Lisbon, the European Council has the leeway to decide unanimously on the size of the European Commission. In case there is no consensus in the European Council on setting a smaller size of Commission, certain innovative ideas are worth exploring. For instance, the Franco-German Working Group proposed dividing the Commission's members equally between lead commissioners and commissioners on a strictly rotating basis and distributing portfolios to pairs of lead commissioners and commissioners. For the European Parliament, the Treaty of Lisbon indicates that its composition is decided by the European Council by unanimity on the initiative of the European Parliament. The same article also sets the rules for the size of the European Parliament and the EU citizens' representation. Therefore, the existing institutional framework ensures that allocating MEP seats to new member states will not cause a proportionate increase in the Parliament size. Crucially, the EU institutions may decide to reduce the application of unanimity in decision-making. The Council and the European Council may use the passerelle clauses previewed in different articles of the Treaty of Lisbon to modify decision-making procedures and replace unanimity with qualified majority voting in most policy areas. As the European Commission suggested, the recourse to passerelle clauses may be accompanied by appropriate and proportionate safeguards to reassure member states that their strategic national interest will not be overlooked. And finally, an increase in the EU's own resources and the EU budget requires the consent of the European Parliament and member states. It is not dependent on a treaty modification. So in sum, although a treaty modification will give a new impetus to European integration, it is not a prerequisite to making the Union enlargement ready. What is needed is a commitment from member states to work towards improving EU governance, and those internal reforms that I just mentioned are much needed, irrespective of whether the EU will accept new members. Now, the second challenge is the EU accession path of the Western Balkans, and precisely to confront authoritarianism and nationalism. According to Freedom House, all countries in the Western Balkans feature hybrid or transitional regimes. The Bertelsmann Stiftung Index categorizes all countries in the region as defective democracies, except Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is depicted as a highly defective democracy. As for the VDEM project, it classifies Serbia as an electoral autocracy and the rest of the countries as electoral democracies. For more than a decade, regional leaders have taken steps to roll back democratic reforms and consolidate their increasingly liberal governance. With respect to elections, persisting problems include irregularities in the voters' register, widespread practices of vote buying through the operation of consolidated clientelistic networks, and police intimidation at opposition rallies. As far as institutional checks and balances are concerned, judiciaries have remained weak and trapped under the influence of governments. Moreover, they have not been shielded from endemic corruption. Independent state institutions such as the Ombudsman and anti-corruption agencies have been established, but have been seriously understaffed and underfinanced. Different EU reports have remarked on the very poor results of investigations of high-profile cases of organized crime and corruption. In terms of media freedom, a series of reports have expressed concern about the rising trend of incidents of intimidation against journalists, blunt exercises of political pressure, and disrespect to the freedom of expression with criminal charges leading to unbearable fines. Sometimes journalists who may raise probing questions are banned from government press conferences. So in this context, the political climate throughout the region is toxic, with hate speech, a rise of populism, frequent boycotts of parliamentary sessions and elections, and even violent episodes inside the premises of institutions. Authoritarian leaders also use nationalism to legitimize their rule. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, Milorad Dodik has been openly threatening for some time with the secession of Republika Srpska. With respect to the Bosnian Croats, they have been pressing for an electoral reform that would de facto create a third entity in the country, putting in danger its already very thin administrative integrity. As for the Bosniaks, they have not made much effort to show comprehension of some legitimate concerns of the other two ethnic groups. Nationalism has been also the ticket of political campaigning in Kosovo and Serbia. The two sides have been using hate speech and have frequently provoked low-intensity crises that reinforce their legitimacy. It is very disturbing that currently, the glorification of convicted war criminals and the denial or relativization of ethnic cleansing and genocide are becoming routine practice in the region. And here the EU bears some responsibility for the region's political regression. Western Balkan countries do not believe that they have been offered a tangible membership offer. The EU has appeared to be more interested in stability than democratic transformation in the region. To restore the credibility of its enlargement policy, the EU needs to convince applicant countries that they have real prospects of becoming members once they fulfill all accessory requirements. The EU should unequivocally state that the accession of new member states is not conditional on the completion of its internal reforms. Applicant countries should also be consistently encouraged to undertake difficult reforms entailing non-negligible political costs. The Commission should also operationalize the phased accession of applicant countries, registering substantial progress in the reform effort. At the same moment, to induce compliance with accession conditionality, the EU should also apply the reversibility of the process. Democratic regression, prolonged stagnation introducing reforms, and poor alignment with EU foreign policy decisions and actions should no longer be inconsequential. The EU might confront such instances of non-compliance with a range of measures such as pausing or suspending accession negotiations, reopening closed clusters or chapters, and reviewing the financial assistance and benefits offered to applicant countries. Reacting to non-compliance will restore the credibility of the enlargement policy as a merit-based policy, and it will also show to the candidate countries that the EU is not indifferent to their accession process. Now, the third and the last challenge that I present is the economic weakness and the marginal convergence of the Western Balkans with the European Union. At present, the GDP per capita in purchasing power standards in the region is between 27% and 49% of the corresponding average in the European Union. The average salary in Kosovo is €506 and in Albania €675. At the current growth pace, the Western Balkans would attain convergence with the EU in 2076, which is 51 years from now. Despite much progress, the Western Balkans continue to suffer from high rates of chronic unemployment, which affects particularly young people. Youth unemployment affects 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 4 people throughout the region. According to a study, a citizen departs every few minutes from the region as an economic migrant to Europe, and as a result, more than 1 out of 5 people born in the region live abroad. The economic cost of youth migration is measured in terms of loss of potential GDP growth, labor shortages, and state expenses for education. According to some estimations, the cost of youth migration in the Western Balkans stands somewhere between 800 million and 2.5 billion euros per year. The region's low fertility rate aggravates the demographic impact of emigration. In 2023, the fertility rate in the region ranged between 1.34 in Bosnia and Herzegovina to 1.67 in Montenegro, when the replacement level is 2.1. The region faces an acute demographic decline, and different studies project that this population will dramatically shrink in the next decades. The permanent population of Albania has decreased from 2011 to 2023, in 12 years, by 420,000 people. Another indication of unsustainable development is the serious environmental degradation that manifests in air, water, and soil pollution, mainly caused by human activities. With respect to air pollution, in 2023, the sulfur dioxide emissions of Western Balkan coal-fired power plants were 5.7 times higher than the allowed ceiling. Another indication of air pollution is the level of fine particulate matter, this so-called PM2.5. It concerns these microscopic particles that find their way deep into the lungs, causing serious problems such as lower respiratory infections, tracheal, bronchial, and lung cancer, ischemic heart disease, strokes, and death. PM2.5 concentrations in Pristina, Skopje, Tetovo, and Sarajevo are between 3 to 8 times the upper safe level recommended by the World Health Organization. Therefore, EU pre-accession assistance has not sufficed to stimulate the economic convergence of candidate countries with the European Union. The much-advertised new growth plan is in the right direction, but it does not suffice to stimulate economic convergence. In per capita terms, Western Balkan countries are still expected to receive 12 times less money than Croatia, which is an EU member state. The EU should not only substantially increase pre-accession assistance, but candidate countries should also be helped to grow their capacity to administer and absorb EU funds. To that end, it would be beneficial if the EU introduced a methodology of support offered to member states through the EU structural and investment funds in pre-accession assistance. To conclude, keeping the Western Balkans in the waiting room for 22 years is not cost-free. The region is in many respects in worse shape than it was some years ago. If the EU does not move on quickly to improve its governance and reinvigorate its enlargement policy, the geopolitical awakening announced 3 years ago will be little more than another missed opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor Gifakis, for your very interesting and insightful presentation. And now I think is the time for the Q&A session and for the audience to submit their questions in the chat here. And I will read their questions and I will kindly ask the speakers to answer them. So if we have some questions, they are most welcomed. Okay, maybe I should make the first question till the audience is going to think about what questions to submit. So thank you once again. I thank you the speakers for their very interesting presentations. I would like to ask one question to Mrs. Bertolite, to Aiste, and regarding the challenges. I would speak about Moldova. As we know, in July, I think in Moldova, there are going to take place parliamentary elections. And the outcome of these elections is not certain. So there is a possibility that pro-Russian parties will emerge more powerful in the new parliament, and how this will affect the process of EU accession of Moldova. This is about Moldova, and the second question is about Ukraine. And my question and my concern is how Ukraine can integrate in the EU even after a possible ceasefire or a possible, let's say, a kind of any way of peaceful resolution of the conflict. If in Ukraine it will be applied, let's say, the model of Cyprus, in the sense that Ukraine will join the EU in the near future by 2030, as you said, and then the occupied territories from Russia will be integrated in a later time, like the occupied territories of northern Cyprus from Turkey. So this is my twofold questions to you. And one question to Professor Gifakis is, what is your estimate, Professor, about the current developments in Bosnia and Herzegovina? You mentioned about the aspirations of Mr. Dodik, the president of Republika Srpska, and his threats to secede Bosnia, and how this will affect, I would say, the stability of the Western Balkans right now. And also, how about the domestic instability in Serbia right now? And what are the possible repercussions of this in the integration of these countries in the EU and the whole stability of the region? Thank you very much.
Thank you for those questions. Indeed, very, very good questions. As concerns Moldova, we know that the upcoming elections is also a big risk of this possibility of turning the policy. However, the presidential elections in the last year again, and the constitutional change that Moldova made after that, that they put into their constitution that the strategic objective of the country is to be part of EU, is quite good steps in safeguarding this clear pro-European direction for Moldova. And again, from the many things can be learned from the presidential elections. They were quite at the margins of the little difference, but again, pro-European approach won in the elections. So we need to strive and to support Ukraine, Moldova in all the way possible, that actually this pro-European parties and pro-European politicians win the elections. Again, it's not only the support, but it's also important to support, to fight the meddling in the elections. Moldova in the previous elections saw a lot of meddling from Russia. So we need to support them, and they need to be strong on fighting all of this because this do have a big impact. And from the EU side, what would help is, of course, this positive communication and opening of the first cluster, or first or three first clusters in this half of the year before the election. So that would show that EU is quite seriously taking Moldova's integration, and that we are preparing for it, and it's quite clear that they might get into EU, and it's not such a far away target for them. So this would also help in the pro-European communication in the country. As concerns Ukraine, of course, the question is quite complicated, and as you mentioned, we don't have any other examples of only Cyprus example. But from EU perspective, of course, we have very strong policy on non-recognition of the occupation of the occupied regions, And despite of how the negotiations on the ceasefire peace will end, I don't think that we will change this policy. I think that division of Ukraine, and it's not in our foreseen future that we would agree with this, and that we would abandon our non-recognition policy. So it's quite clear that if we welcome Ukraine now with the parts of it occupied, we will have to foresee something in the accession treaty that those parts that when they are liberated, they become the part of European Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther. Professor Jeffakis.
Thanks a lot for these questions about contemporary developments. Mr. Dodik has been found guilty. He should serve a sentence of a year in prison and 6 years abstain from politics. He can appeal to that decision, and up to that there is this is the first instance. There is arrest warrant against him that has been also signaled to Interpol. Justice has to be led. The rule of law has to function. Justice has to operate, and everything has to happen according to these institutions. For some time, he has been the single most consistent ally of Mr. Putin in the Balkans. He has been playing for more than 50 years with fire. He has taken several secessionist movements that have not been responded by the EU and by the international community, but precisely the EU, because I heard before Hungary's role in the case of Ukraine. I can dare to say, I'm an academic, I'm not a public officer, that Hungary is a malign influence also in the Balkans. So due to Orban's objection, the EU has not applied sanctions on Dodik, as the Americans have done since the Biden administration, and we have appeased Bosnia, Republika Srpska, for some years for these secessionist movements. So it's about time. We should let the local institutions work. They should do their business. There is an arrest warrant with him, and the country should move on. Now, the two events that you mentioned are interrelated, and I'll explain which way. In Serbia, we have protest movements for some months. These protest movements are student-led. They are not organized by any political party. The students have been very careful to not to let this effort, this protest movement, be usurped or manipulated by any other actor. They are requesting justice. They would like to. This has happened after an accident that shows the corruption in the country, the lack of transparency in contracts, the role of China. There's different deficiencies have manifested in this accident. They are asking for justice. They're asking for transparency. They would like to know more about this contract that the canopy was constructed in Novi Sad that collapsed with the accident a few months ago. They are asking also for the release of their fellow students, because the regime reacted by, for example, by the intelligence services contacting students and asking them to inquire them. And also the regime has used a few days ago a long-range sound cannon against them. This is the way that an authoritarian regime deals with students protesting and requesting for a case of a rule of law. And at the same moment, the regime, which is trying to distract the attention and bring it elsewhere, and also it tries to find a role in the Bosnian developments. For instance, President Vučić traveled to Banja Luka once the verdict was known, to express his support to Dodik. Today I'm seeing in the Serbian media that they're asking from Interpol to seize these arrest warrants, because he's a Serbian citizen. Dodik is a citizen in Serbia and in Bosnia simultaneously. Anyhow, Serbia tries somehow to find other crises to export the problem. The student movement is very important. It was about time to see something like this in Serbia. But there are 2 points that I would like to mention here. A, we will not see among the student movement, which has hundreds of thousands of people, any EU flag. And this is the failure of the EU quickly and to stand by them and to ask justice and the rule of law, and who have appeared in the eyes of the Serbian society as complicit to the stabilitocracy of Vučić in Serbia, because it has not been helpful in the past that the European Commission was issuing reports saying that the country shows no progress, but at the same moment EU officials were visiting the next day Belgrade, and they were saying that the country does a tremendous effort and should be commended. And B, the second part, is that being an apolitical student movement, if the country heads to elections, which very probably will be rigged as the last elections in December 23, there is no clear opponent. This movement does not translate, is not capitalized by any party. So very likely the regime will reaffirm its authority. So there is a challenge in this Serbian protest movement to find a way to make political gains. So far it is student run. They are not asking for elections. They're asking for the rule of law and justice. But at the end of the day, we know that political problems, whether it's in a past, are solved in elections. And there's nothing to present this vibrant movement.
Thank you very much, Professor Gifakis, for your detailed answer to my question. And now I will go to a comment by His Excellency, the Ambassador of Moldova to Greece, Mr. Andrei Popov. He's mentioning that the election date in Moldova for the parliamentary elections is not decided yet. So either it's going to be in end of July or most likely, as he says, in September or October 2025. Now I have a question from Her Excellency, the Ambassador of the Republic of Lithuania, Mrs. Lina Skerstonaitė. I don't know, Lina, if you would like to open your microphone and make the question yourself, or if you want me to read it.
Okay, I can do. I want to ask Professor Tifakis about Serbia and about Albania. About Serbia, specifically bearing in mind, that right now we don't have the alignment on common foreign and security policy. So how you see that proceeding? And another question regarding Albania. They have an upcoming elections in May. So how do you think the upcoming elections will influence in some ways their European aspirations? Thank you.
Thanks a lot for these questions. Okay, what I mentioned earlier in my intervention is that giving a credible membership offer to countries means two things. One is to reward progress, and the Western Balkans have been for 22 years waiting. So the EU has failed so far to show that it really means that it intends to integrate the region. And I'm saying for the period before the war in Ukraine, because since 2022, we see that the enlargement has become again an important policy in the European Union. The second part of credibility, that I mentioned, is the reversibility of the process. Serbia is in a very severe democratic backsliding during the last years, second after Turkey and Belarus in the region, and the EU has failed to take any measure to manifest its annoyance with this recession. On the contrary, we have been convinced by President Vučić that he's important because he's maintaining, he's guaranteeing stability in Kosovo and Bosnia. And whenever we don't believe him, we have been in the Serbia-Kosovo border minor incidents created, low-key crisis, which he reminds us that things can also go wrong. And being so far content to observe stability, we have failed also to sanction lack of compliance. So Serbia is not coming closer to the EU. At the same moment, as I mentioned, for the Serbian society, we're complicit to this because we have given external legitimacy to the regime. I mentioned indirectly, I didn't mention the persons that have so far visited Belgrade and commented his efforts in the rule of law. In stark opposition with the EU official documents released a few days ago. We have opened several chapters of negotiations when there was manifested no progress, and we have sent all the wrong signals. And that's why I said that the protest, we won't see a single EU flag, and we are losing the Serbian society. So in my opinion, for Serbia, we have to be tougher. At the same moment, and this is a sign of fairness, we have to move on quickly with Montenegro, which may, according to some plans, complete in a couple of years. And in this way, you show to the region that, I am serious about it. Who makes progress is rewarded, and who lags behind receives an alarm. This is the way to move on. Now, and also that President Vučić, is playing a game of strategic hedging, not only with Russia, but also because his lack of compliance with EU foreign policy decision does not concern only Russia, but also China. And he's a major partner, having signed last year an agreement for a common future with China. So he's playing at the same moment this strategic hedging game between the EU, the United States, Russia, and China, for which we have not reacted so far. Now, going to Albania, I'm not expecting anything to come out of the elections. Very probably Prime Minister Rama will get a new mandate. The opposition has nothing different to present. Berisha has been for several decades here, and he has also issues in the past. Also, he has faced sanctions from the United States for corruption. So the biggest challenge for Albania is the rule of law reforms. There has been a multi-year effort in justice reform that has been justice vetting that has been completed. Now we see that SPAC makes some high-profile investigations. We are not sure yet that this process has been properly completed. Several judges have been dismissed. They have been replaced by a new generation of people who have not been found, who have not been corrupted. But still, we need time to see that all this will stabilize and will become consolidated. So if I were making a wild bet, and if we presume that the positive scenario is that Montenegro will be the 20th country in a couple of years finishing the negotiations, my bet will be that in the next years I will see Albania and Moldova following suit as the countries with the least problems from both regions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dufakis, for your answer. Now we have another question from Mr. Iorios Koukakis, who is also Secretary General of KEDISA. I will read his question. Good morning and congratulations to the speakers. My question is the following. Some analysts express their fear that the contemporary geopolitical conditions might lead to the accession of candidate states without being fully prepared in terms of fulfilling the negotiation chapters. They are also concerned that their accession might lead in the future to more cases like Hungary setting obstacles to the EU policy. What is your opinion? The question is to both speakers. Thank you, Mr. Koukakis. Please, Aiste, you would like to answer first, or Professor Dufakis?
Yeah, I can couple of words. I think that the answer, of course, it's complicated. However, the principles that I've stressed that guide our approach to this is first merits-based, and second, of course, geopolitical necessity, geopolitical strategy that we need the enlargement. EU needs the enlargement, and I think this. This goes together with what Professor Tsifakis says about the EU being serious about the enlargement. But again, being serious, that means showing that we are ready, we are going to accept you, but we require, and the merits-based approach must remain as a fundamental principle. So in terms of our approach, it's quite clear. We are very much supportive for Ukraine's, Moldova's integration, but in the same way, we were very much supportive, and we are still very much supportive to Georgia's integration. However, we see that in case then the country is turning its back to EU, you cannot go ahead with the integration process. So then it will depend actually what we want, and all EU's sense of what is EU is in danger, actually. If you go ahead with the countries that are turning their back to the rules-based approach, to the requirements and the fundamentals, then you don't know where you are heading. It's not about EU then, it's about something else. In terms of if go into the examples of when the countries that are not that haven't finished the whole process of negotiations, we have the example with Romania and Bulgaria that they actually entered at some stage where some of the parts were the acquis communautaires were not entirely transmitted. However, we see that that's not the same case with Romania and Bulgaria that we have with Hungary now. So it depends on how the process is steered. A lot depends on how EU is prepared to steer this process and to keep those two principles, showing that we are serious, but on the other hand, keeping this quite clear stick of the merits-based approach and requirements. Thank you.
Professor Gifakis, please.
Thanks. I would like to add a few elements to this, what was already mentioned about the merit-based. What the EU has done so far, it has fast-tracked, in the case of Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, some initial steps that, in my opinion, are meaningless. I mean, elevating a country from potential country to country or deciding to open accession negotiation, it means nothing. It is true that in the Western Balkans, these steps have taken 2 decades, and Kosovo is still a potential country, and North Macedonia has not genuinely open accession negotiation, though since 2009 they have received the green light from the European Commission. So all these steps have taken several years in the Western Balkans and happen in Eastern Europe within a few months. But these steps are meaningless. If we take as an example Croatia's EU accession, Croatia at the end of the day had to absorb close to 150,000 pages of acquis communautaire. So this is something that the EU cannot lower the bar. A country cannot accede that has not absorbed, has not integrated into its legal system the whole EU legislation, which has grown since 2013 when Croatia became a member, so I presume it is several 10,000 pages larger. So starting immediate accession negotiations with all countries, this is a message that we are serious about it, but these negotiations can last for several years. If we see the case of countries of Central and Eastern Europe, they last close to a decade, depending on the level of preparedness. So moving now forward does not mean that we'll close immediately negotiations, and if these countries are not ready, and as already mentioned, this is a unanimous process, and everyone has to acknowledge that every country has fully fulfilled the EU accession requirements. So there's no need to fear that. The EU has lowered the bar for the very initial meaningless steps that took too long in the Western Balkans, but the EU has not lowered the bar on closing accession negotiation, in closing negotiation in specific chapters. Now, the question of being countries, the question that the countries can be more, such as turning into Hungary. We cannot know. I mean, Hungary was not in that way in 2004. The way that Hungary has changed during the last decade was in 2004, so I cannot claim for any country. Do you know how France will behave if the next presidential elections Marine Le Pen wins? Or do we know what will happen if Wilders he was a prime minister in Netherlands, or AfD has won in Germany? So this is a discussion that I cannot speculate what it means. But at the present is very clearly that they are in the region, for example, Serbia in the Western Balkans, who are allies of Orban, and they have the similar views. It's the EU's business, through the conditionality, to make sure that this type of attitudes won't be tolerated. And it's the EU's business to sort out its home and stop Orban from acting in that way and exposing and compromising the EU coherence, the EU cohesion. There are instruments in the treaty, and also the EU foreign policy. I will mention something that should not go unnoticed. Before the war in Ukraine, the enlargement portfolio was a second rate. From 2019 to 2024, no one expressed interest. It was given to Hungary. So the EU foreign policy towards the Western Balkans was explained, was presented from Hungary. Mr. Vareli implemented a Hungarian foreign policy towards the Western Balkans as an enlargement, as an EU enlargement policy. It's no wonder now that it has been given the portfolio of animal rights. But this shows how low priority was EU enlargement before the war in Ukraine, but also the results of leaving it to a country that clearly had a different agenda from most EU members on European integration.
Thank you very much, Professor Gifakis, for your answer to Mr. Koukakis. I'm moving forward with the question from Mrs. Melina Daskalaki. She says that I have a rather provocative question. Can we foresee in near future a willingly or reluctantly approach of EU to Russia under the de facto pressure and influence of the USA? And if such a political change can be considered possible, how is it going to affect the enlargements of the EU? should the enlargement strategically precede and conclude before any such approach? I suppose with Russia, she means. Yes, thank you. I suppose that your question is to both speakers. So, Mrs. Bertolita, you would like to try to answer this question, please?
Yeah, provocative question that could be responded with another provocative question. Do we want to live in this world where we are governed by authoritarian regimes, dictatorships, and we agree to abandon all this rules-based order? Do we want to live in the world where we forgive what Russia has been doing, the war crimes in Ukraine, the deported children, the civilians killed in Ukraine? Do we want to forget Mariupolis? I mean, for Greece, I think it's close to your heart. It's basically demolished the whole city. Reapproachment with Russia is the question about European security, and is about the Europe, not so much about the enlargement, although the enlargement, as in my presentation, I said that that's also about European security. But again, reapproachment with the aggressor, that is threatening and not waging the war only in Ukraine, but also in our countries. And those hybrid attacks that we are experiencing that are not becoming not even hybrid, they are quite real physical kinetic attacks on our soil. So these questions are much bigger than just the enlargement. You know, the reapproachment with Russia is basically thinking that we lower the bar for our security as we see it. So I don't think so that this is going to go on into this direction. But if you ask me to imagine the fantasies about of course some changes and the politics of France, Germany, some dictator comes to rule Lithuania in the future. So I don't think that we would care about enlargement. That will not be European Union as we see and as what we believe in. Thank you.
Well, that's a provocative question indeed. I mean, I am afraid that the USA disengagement and the rupture in the West can create cracks inside the EU by countries who would like not to take a different policy than the United States and might want to review our policies. Hungary has been saying this for years on different policy. I'm afraid that group can enlarge. So I'm afraid for the coherence inside the EU with countries far away from Russia, remotely comparing to Russia, that can think that maybe without the United States support, we should review this. But in a more general picture, the European Union and Russia have become antithetical. This is a competition, this is a Cold War in Europe that is here to stay. We are a union that has more than 10 times the GDP of Russia. So the more we're advancing towards integration, Russia perceives us as an important player in the region. Putin is clearly aggressive towards the West, including the EU, and by financing Marine Le Pen and Orban and other leaders of Eurosceptic parties in Europe, he has a specific target, which is to destroy the European Union. So he's working to destroy this. So if we presume that there is a European Union that advances, this group and this organization is clearly antithetical to Russia, ontologically. And the Russian threat is existential. We have just to hear what President Macron explained last week, where he elaborated on their arms plans, on the arms and on the development of weapons, and what is actually Russia's strategic vision. So I'm afraid that there can be a challenge to our coherence by countries that without the United States might have cold feet to move on to that direction. But overall, anyone who's believing in European integration is compelled to stand against Russia because Russia is threatening not only the nations or the people, but the integration as a project, because it's a project that it looks competitive to its own self. And at this moment, and that's very alarming, we're having exactly the same allergy to European integration on the other side of the Atlantic, where President Trump does not believe at all in this phenomenon. He's speaking directly to state leaders. Callas went in the United States, and Rubio did not have the minimum courtesy to dedicate half an hour with her and just affirm that they disagree. She went all the way there and she came back without having a meeting. So very clearly, also in the United States, they have a knowledge to the European integration. So that might be on the positive, on an optimist scenario, that might be an impetus for more European integration, because the weaker the European integration is, the weaker the European Union is, the more it will be vulnerable to other powers that do not see it competitively or as an actor that shouldn't be there.
Thank you very much, both speakers, for the answer to the question of Mrs. Daskalaki. Now I will go to a question by Dr. Panagiotis Faelos, Vice President of KEDISA. His question, I think, is more about the current development in the EU about the rearm Europe and the European security and defense. So he says, I would like to ask Professor Gefakis his view on Turkey's increased involvement in EU security policies. Do you believe that Greece has the right approach on Turkey and its relationship with the EU? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. That's the main question, only in Greece, not all throughout Europe. And that's in difference to here. If we start from the assumption that Europeans can no longer rely on the Americans, the Europeans are not enough. Our present-day capabilities do not suffice to contain Russia. We know this. So it is the only rational relation for the EU and European countries, I'm putting the UK inside, to find ways to involve Turkey and to draw some of Turkey's military power in containing Russia. This is the only orthological decision that can take European powers, seeing that they lost the United States support and that they are on their own against the Russian threat. Greece cannot fight this by asking something that is unacceptable, which means let the countries that they are more indifferent, such as Portugal or Spain, or more weak, such as Luxembourg, to mention other countries, to carry the weight of containing Russia. So this is a lost fight, and they won't understand us if you tell them don't involve Turkey, because we don't have an excess of capabilities, we have a deficiency. Now, I cannot comment on the Greek approach very simply because there's no Greek or EU approach. We are lost. We are having summit every week, summit after summit, trying to figure out where we stand. So there's no EU approach to which Greece replies. But if I were to make a policy recommendation to the Greek government, that will be not to obstruct Turkey's involvement, but to try to shape it, which means exactly the conditions under which this involvement will be beneficial for European security, but cannot be harmful to other countries' interests. So that's the only rational way of dealing with it, because if we go in the opposite direction, because I saw in Greece there were some unease with the London meeting where Turkey was invited, Canada was invited, the UK organized it, but let's face it, these are the most important military powers in Europe that they should be on the table. So the challenge for Greece is to find ways that what is happening is unavoidable, to somehow shape it and to put some rules, some conditions, which means we need Turkey's approach, we need Turkey's participation. If they are willing to leave the policy of balancing between Ukraine and Russia, because they have helped Ukraine, they have taken a stance on its integrity, but at the same moment they have not applied sanctions. So if Turkey is willing to move to a more pro-Ukraine policy, that's more than welcome. We should channel this assistance. We cannot avoid it, but at the same moment, Greece should make sure this is a more general position that all this Turkish participation in European security is not against the interest of specific member states in their bilateral issues and not generally on European security. So I don't know if I answered sufficiently, because it's yet in the beginning. We're seeing the beginning of this evolving, and we don't know what's the next day. We're just seeing several meetings with inviting Turkish officials and trying to see how willing they are to be part of it.
Thank you very much,
Mr. Banoutsos, would it be possible to ask the professor just for one comment on one other additional issue on what I asked? Is that possible?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. What I wanted to add is that I agree completely with what you say, that we must give our support with some conditions. So I'd like to ask you, first of all, the policy of Athens of Greece, that we give this, we say, okay, that there are no differences in the Aegean Sea, like we try to find the way to conciliate our differences. The first thing is that we don't say about the threats of Turkey towards Greece, and secondly, we don't say anywhere that the continued invasion of Turkey in Cyprus is the same thing that Russia did in Ukraine. So I don't see that we don't put on the table as Greece these two conditions. That first of all, they must not still occupy Cyprus, and secondly, that we don't say anything about the threats in the Aegean Sea. That is everyday policy. That this happens every day. I mean, so what do you think, that we don't put any conditions on this support towards Turkey?
I wasn't meaning that. I mean, speaking of Cyprus, we all know that the EU has frozen accession negotiation with Turkey because Turkey does not recognize an EU member. So it's very clear, you know, that this is an EU policy. We don't need to add anything to this. Now, in the Aegean, if we had tomorrow a crisis, which we don't have at the present, like we had a few years ago, that's a thing to intervene and to mention all these things. At the present, well, the only debate in the EU is Ukraine. And if Greece comes out and says, you know, look at the Aegean, I have no crisis now, but I would like, I don't know what I'm asking at this moment, you may look the bizarre that you think, sorry for this example, autistic, that you're in your own world. You don't see what's happening around you and you care for your own problems. At this point, the agenda is Ukraine. In the Aegean, we are passing a break. I agree, it's a break. It's not that won't not last forever. Of some peaceful waters, with all differences being here. Yeah. At this moment, you cannot put any strings to Turkey's support in Ukraine, because that's a main issue. But you have to be on alert and you have to make sure that all this does not hurt your interest. We will create much more much more anxiety in Europe if at this moment we go to raise issues that are not on the table at the present. Because, you know, they are noticing that in the Aegean that nothing's happening. We all know, though, this is temporary. We all know that this can change within a days, months, or at any moment. But at this moment, this is not the timing. You will hurt your credibility because you'll show that you don't understand what's at stake in European security at this timing.
Thank you very much, Professor Gifakis, for your answer. I can't see other questions, to be honest, on the chat right now. We have another approximately 20 minutes to complete the scheduled 2 hours of the webinar. So I would encourage the participants to submit a few more questions to the speakers before closing the webinar today. So please submit your questions on the chat. Okay, I will leave you some time to think of questions, and I will try to submit another question to Mrs. Bertolite, but also to Professor Gifakis. It's about the accession of, I would say, of Ukraine in the EU, and how. Okay, in terms of defense and security, I think it's logical to assume that this will enhance Europe's security and defense, the accession of Ukraine. But in the last, I would say, months, we witnessed that, for example, the European farmers were very much against the imports of Ukrainian agricultural products inside the EU. They saw this as a competition towards their own products. So the Ukrainian products were much cheaper. So I would ask you, what is the challenge of this for the common agricultural policy? If Ukraine and when Ukraine will become a member of EU, how the EU should respond to this challenge of cheap Ukraine's agricultural products in the common market? Thank you.
Yes, indeed, this is one of those questions that raise a lot during the past couple of years, especially due to the ATM measures that Europe is applying. These are interim, short-term measures that we abolished all the tariffs of quotas for Ukraine to help them to export their agricultural products. And Commission already announced that probably the ATM will not be prolonged this year, but we are going to fasten negotiations on via association and DCFTA agreement that also allows to liberalize the trade in agriculture. Indeed, agriculture in Ukraine is one of the main sectors that is feeding the world. It's not only about Europe. No, we saw the food crisis, then the war started because Ukraine couldn't export its grain from Ukraine. No, and it's I think the historical thing, and for you, for Greece, you should you have quite historical relations in this term as concerns the grain from Ukraine. No, but if looking at Europe and on the statistics, that actually in the recent years until Commission hadn't applied the measures on Russia, actually EU was importing much more grain from Russia than from Ukraine. So sometimes those issues are actually used very often in disinformation and the impact that it actually has on EU and its farmers. As concerns EU and farmers, in general, common agricultural policy needs reforming. You know, we will talk about the reforming of the common agricultural policy. And as I talked a little bit about all, you know, the direct payments that from Lithuanian perspective, our farmers are not receiving the same direct payments that the other farmers, the average direct payments that are given to the farmers in Europe, and still they are competing in the same market. So again, I think for Ukraine and integrating Ukraine, probably the transitional periods will be applied as concerns the agricultural policy, and they will have to compete in a very competitive market of European Union. And, you know, from the consumer perspective, if you ask me, cheap food is much better. But again, for us, I think it's also, we have to think about the security of supply, about the security of food, all the requirements that need to be applied on Ukraine, on its products, etc. Lots of things that Ukraine will have to adopt and change. Then they will be negotiating and adopting the necessary acquis in this area. So a lot of things will be changed, but that's a really complex question. But we need to refrain from accepting all this, you know, disinformation that comes also with this issue. As I mentioned, you know, we were importing Russians much bigger quantities of Russian grain than the grain from Ukraine in Europe itself. Thank you.
I think that there is nothing new about it. Every round of enlargement had some type of complications. I would like to recall the case of Spain's easy accession that delayed in comparison to Greece because France saw the Spanish agricultural sector competitively. And also Greece wanted the Mediterranean programs and also in order to agree for the accession of Spain and Portugal. So there's nothing new. Every round of accession has countries that have specific features that we have to see. But if we look at the general picture, as I mentioned in the beginning, we definitely need an increase of the EU budget. We need to increase the EU own resources. So that's a requirement in order to move forward. And this is something that should happen. And anyhow, an increase of the EU budget will, the purpose of increasing EU budget is to direct assistance to some sectors, including the agricultural policy, which, by the way, has been for too many decades, up to the mid-80s, disproportionately privileged in the European community, receiving almost half of the EC budget. And it has been the cohesion policy that has emerged gradually from the late 80s and has come to rebalance this. So we're not an agricultural community. It has, for specific historical reasons, it has had a privileged position inside the EC. We took this decision because we care about Europe's self-sufficiency, or let's say security of supply of main commodities for the nutrition of the population. This is something that has remained from the Second World War, a fear that we don't have sufficient supplies of commodities for nutrition. But in that case, Ukraine is the solution to the problem, as already mentioned, because it's coming to help us with this huge agricultural sector.
Thank you very much, both of you, for your answers. And I have another question here from Dr. Svailos. It's addressed to Mrs. Bertulite. It's about the energy policy of Lithuania at the current difficult moment. So I suppose that he's asking how's your current energy policy and
supply and in general.
Oh, but we don't have any difficulties in Lithuania. It's actually, I don't know where this notion comes from, but we are actually in Lithuania, we are very proud because we finally reached our energy independence. This year, we made the final steps to reach our energy independence and to finally connect to the European grid. Synchronization with the European grid is one of those achievements that we are super proud this year. And of course, we are absolutely independent from Russia. So this is building LNG, finally buying it, having the links with the Western Europe and the grid, ensure that we are absolutely independent from Russia and that Russia cannot manipulate in our politics, making pressure on this issue.
Yes, I meant also that the European Union in general has or will have some shortages. And that's why we talk about the possibilities of the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean, creating new supplies. That's what I asked. Okay, it's fine, don't worry.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely what all the EU member states need to do. Of course, investing in the renewables and green energy that also ensures our independence and just continuing the green course, Green Deal, and we encourage to take your Lithuanian example in this case.
Thank you very much.
I'm not seeing another question, to be honest. Now we are close to the end of today's webinar. We have another 10 minutes. So maybe I will pose the last question myself to the speakers. It's going to be, let's say, more geopolitical, this question. It's not about enlargement. The first question is to Mrs. Bertulite, is how much there is a concern and a fear from Lithuania, and I will say generally from the Baltic states, that after a possible ceasefire in the Ukrainian conflict or a kind of peaceful resolution, that Russia will threaten the Baltic states in the coming future, after having, let's say, resolved the issue with Ukraine. And the other question is for Professor Gifakis, is about how optimist or not optimist he is about the current developments in the Western Balkans, and if there is any risk of even a low tense conflict within the Balkans right now, or not? Specifically, if something happens with the Republika Srpska or in the relations between Serbia and Kosovo. This is what I can think of, some, let's say, instability there. So yes, this is my question. Thank you.
Yeah, difficult question again, but to see if you ask about the feeling in the society, so I think there is less fear than it was during the first 3 days of invasion, Russian invasion to Ukraine. That although it could have been expected, it came by a surprise, and in the society there was a huge feel of threat and understanding that, you know, Europe is vulnerable. I think today we are a bit further in the developing our, you know, preparedness and understanding that, well, it might happen, you know, and we read the intelligence. We see that Russia, if it's not stopped, if it's not defeated in Ukraine, what our intelligence openly is saying, that it might try to test NATO, the Article 5 of NATO in the next 5 years. So we know this, but I think we take it with the notion of that we need to be prepared. We need to strengthen our security, our defense industry. I think motivation and determination is very high. In Lithuania, our government announced that we will be seeking to have 5% of GDP dedicated to the defense. This year, we will reach around 3. I'm not the specialist in this, but 3.5, we are moving towards 4% of GDP dedicated to defense. But in next few years, we will probably dedicate even 5 or more % to defense. Again, EU is awakened. You see how seriously this situation is taken by the European Commission. The proposed rearm EU plan, the proposed white paper on defense, all of this gives hope that we will be much better prepared. And then, of course, this preparedness is also part of deterrence for Russia. Russia is not in the situation now that it would be very strong, you know. Of course, it tested their, you know, war machine and warmed up their war machine in Ukraine, but we saw that they couldn't manage to take Ukraine. Supposedly the strongest army, you know, but appeared to be very corrupt and very weak army. Of course, after 3 years of war, they learned their lessons, and this ceasefire is really necessary for Russia if they want to, you know, to rebuild their war powers, and their economy is struggling. So this ceasefire is quite dangerous if Russia is not contained. So I think what will be important for Europe is that we keep on pressuring Russia with sanctions, with all the possible containment that we can have, strengthening our security and defense policies, defense industry, investing much more in defense, boosting our industry, and all of the rest. So we are not afraid, but we are concerned and we are preparing.
Thank you very much, Professor Gifakis, please. Yes.
To somehow, you know, lighten the discussion, to lighten the discussion, I would say the conditions of optimism. So I wouldn't say if I'm optimist or pessimist. I'll say much more what may make us optimist. And thinking geopolitically, if we see at the Western Balkans, on the contrary to Eastern Europe, to Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, these are countries that do not have common borders with Russia or with China or with any other country. They are an inner courtyard to the EU. They are surrounded by EU members. In population terms, they are approximately the Netherlands. In economic terms, they are approximately Slovakia. So it's the Netherlands with the economy of Slovakia. So if the EU cannot seriously do its business there, which means to advance consistently the enlargement and pay attention to the region's problems, if the EU can't do this, everything will go well. If the EU fails to do that in a so privileged geopolitical landscape, as opposed to Middle East, Africa, or Eastern Europe, where we are trying to help Ukraine, but Ukraine has a common border with Russia, which is beyond our capacities to influence there. So if the EU fails in the Western Balkans after 25 years, there is no point of talking of EU foreign policy elsewhere. So it's a major challenge to the EU credibility to deliver, to do the business, to finish it. It started 2 decades ago. It's not such much of a daunting task. Dodik, Vucic, and their likes may try to destabilize the region or prove their utility by provoking low-scale crisis, as you mentioned, but it's our job to react to this and to show that this is not acceptable. And mentioning, as I said before, that they don't have a common border with any other country where they can see help coming. So the optimist scenario is that we'll be serious, or our deeds will follow our words, and will complete the business in the next years.
Thank you very much, Professor Zoufakis, for your answer. Well, now I think we're approaching the end of the webinar. We are 4 minutes to 1 o'clock. So since I cannot see another question on the chat, I will conclude today's webinar. I would like to thank once more the distinguished speakers for their really interesting presentations and their really insightful presentations and answers, of course. And I think that everybody here today will leave more knowledgeable, this is the scope of a webinar. And of course, I would like to thank once more the Embassy of Lithuania to the Hellenic Republic in Greece, Her Excellency Mrs. Lina Skerstonaitė and the Deputy Head of Mission, Mr. Mindaugas Vyskupaitis, for their cooperation and support, and for being, so we had this webinar today. So I would like also to thank all the attendees, all the participants of the webinar, who were quite a lot from what I can see. It was a different, let's say, audience from people I could see from embassies, and also students and experts and other people who participated. So we thank them very much for being here with us today. And my last comment will be for whoever is interested to receive an attendance, a certificate of attendance, after the conclusion of today's webinar, to send an email to info@kedisa.gr, and he or she will receive the certificate in the coming days. I would say as soon as possible. No worries, we have always sent you the certificates. Thank you very much, everyone, for today, and I hope to see you. I hope to make another webinar, Lina, in the near future with another interesting topic as today's one, and timely. So once again, thanks to Professor Zoufakis and to Mrs. Bertulita, to Her Excellency the Ambassador. And I would like now to ask Mr. Athousakis to close the recording and the webinar. Thank you very much, cordially.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.